Welcome to session 347 of the Bible in a Year commentary. If you started the series on the 1st of January, then today should be the 13th of December. Today we'll be looking at Jude and Psalm 37. First of all, let's get an overview of Jude. Traditionally attributed to one of Jesus' brothers, Jude is the last of our general epistles. As with other letters, there's some debate whether it was actually written by Jude or by someone under his name. The dating is unclear, with those who argue for Jude being the author ranging from the 50s to 90 CE, while those who argue a later author suggest as late as the 150s CE. Here's a summary of the structure, but I would recommend checking out the written version of this commentary in the description to see the structure properly for yourself, particularly as today there are two. But we start with Jude 1-4, the opening charge to hold the faith. Then we have Jude 5-16, the Old Testament examples of rebellion. Jude 17-19, warnings from the apostles. And then Jude 20-25, the closing charge to hold the faith. While it seems like Jude is written to a general audience, there is definitely an expectation that the original audience knew their Old Testament and other Second Temple literature. And the author draws on multiple Old Testament examples to prove their point, but they also point to stories we don't see in our Old Testament. These stories appear in other writings and have become part of the Jewish tradition. The focus of the letter is to warn against false teachers who have come to cause trouble. The author points to these Old Testament examples to show that God judges and punishes those who work against him to corrupt his people. So let's jump in with today's reading, Jude. The letter is addressed from Jude, a servant of Jesus Christ and brother of James. That's Jude 1. Rather than directly say that they are brothers of Jesus, the author distances themselves a little by calling themselves the brother of James, who we also know was a brother of Jesus. They give the usual greetings and blessings and then explain why they are writing. It is their desire to encourage the readers to hold on to their faith, as there are those amongst them that are causing troubles and perverting the faith. These people who long ago were designated for this condemnation as ungodly. That's Jude 4. There's a few possible interpretations of this. It could be referring to a sort of divine foreknowledge that just as believers were chosen before the creation of the world, these people were always going to rebel against God. Or it could be a reference to the Old Testament prophesying about those that would rebel and speak falsely of God. See Deuteronomy 13 verse 1-5, Jeremiah 23 verses 16-40, and Micah 3 verse 5-7. Or it could be referring to early church writings where the apostles warned against false teachers. Have a look at Acts 20 verse 29-30, 1 Timothy 4 verse 1-3, 2 Timothy 3 verse 13, and 2 Peter 2 verses 1-3 verses 4. These people are immoral and they seek to undermine Jesus. This leads the author to draw on examples of when God has judged and punished those who rebel against him. After God brought the Israelites out of Egypt, there were multiple times where he killed people for their disobedience and rebellion. There was the punishment for the golden calf in Exodus 32, the striking down of Aaron's sons who rebelled as priests in Leviticus 10 verses 1-3, the people who complained against God in Numbers 11, and Korah's rebellion in Numbers 16, just to name a few. Jude then refers to the angels who did not keep their own position but left their proper dwellings. He has kept them in eternal chains in deepest darkness for the judgment of the great day. That's Jude 6. This is a reference to Genesis 6 and the sons of God, but the language is from 1st Enoch. There, these sons of God are depicted as coming down to corrupt humanity by giving them access to things that would corrupt and destroy them, like magic and instructions for making weapons. In 1st Enoch, God eventually traps the spiritual rebels in chains waiting for judgment. Next up, Jude points to Sodom and Gomorrah, who were punished for their sexual immorality and pursued unnatural lusts. That's Jude 7. A lot of people assume that this Genesis 19 passage was all about homosexuality, but that is to misunderstand the culture. The crime of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah was that they wanted to dominate and emasculate the guests who have entered their city. This was done through sexual violence, which unfortunately was not an uncommon practice at the time. We see a similar practice in many prisons today, where sexual violence is not an expression of sexuality, but of domination and subjugation. The unnatural lusts were not because the men were male, but because they were angels. In many ways, Genesis 19 was an inversion of Genesis 6. In Genesis 6, spiritual beings came down to have sexual relationships with human women. In Genesis 19, human men tried to have sexual relationships with spiritual beings. For this perversion and their violence, Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. But then coming back to their present, the author points to those rebellious in the church, which they now call dreamers. That's Jude 8. These dreamers are like these Old Testament examples because they reject authority and pursue ungodly behaviour. Then we're back to more examples. The author points to a story where the archangel Michael fights with the devil over the body of Moses. This story does not appear in the Old Testament or in any Second Temple literature that we have access to. There's evidence it was part of a book known as the Assumption of Moses, though we have no surviving copies of this book. The point of this story is that even though the Archangel Michael is fighting with the literal devil, he does not feel qualified to slander or judge them. Instead, He appeals to God to judge them. In contrast, these rebels in the church happily slander others in the church because they don't understand what they're talking about. They are like Cain mindlessly attacking his brother in Genesis 4, or Balaam willing to try and corrupt others for personal gain. See Numbers 22:25 and Numbers 31 verse 16. Or like the rebellion of Korah, who out of jealousy sought power for themselves even though they are not worthy of it. Have a look at Genesis 16. The author then gives a series of metaphors to show how these rebels are ungodly. They are like blemishes in the Lord's Supper because they don't understand the significance of the meal, but instead use it as an opportunity to gorge themselves. They are like clouds without rain or trees that bear no fruit. Useless. Or like waves of the sea that produce a lot of foam that then quickly dissolves away. They are like shooting stars in the sky, unwilling to stay in the spot that God had fixed for them. Then the author quotes 1 Enoch 1 verse 9, which prophesies that God will come with his heavenly hosts and execute judgment on the ungodly. These rebels in the church complain and they cause problems. They are slaves to their own desires and are two-faced, flattering members of the church to their face just to win influence. They will be judged. The author reminds the readers that the apostles warned them there would be people like these, and that these people do not have the Spirit in them, they just cause divisions. And so the author switches to encouragement to the readers. They should hold to the faith, praying in the Spirit. They should keep to the love of God and look forward to the eternal life offered by Jesus. And perhaps most importantly, they should have mercy on those who are being influenced by these rebels, guiding them back to God. Finally, the author ends with a blessing. Jesus is the one who keeps the readers pure, standing in the faith. May his be the glory, majesty, and power, and all authority for all time. Jude is an encouragement to believers to take seriously the reality that there will be always those who seek to corrupt the faithful and cause problems. Spiritual rebellion has been part of the biblical story from the beginning. The response then is to have nothing to do with it and try to save others from it. But that is the book of Jude. Now let's look at Psalm 37. This psalm is attributed to King David and falls into the category of wisdom psalm. It instructs the reader or listener on how to lead a moral life. The psalm is an acrostic where every couple of verses starts with a different letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It's also a chiasm, though a very long one due to the length of the psalm. Here is a summary of the structure. We start with verses 1 to 8, the righteous must ignore the wicked and trust in God. Then we have verse 9, wait and inherit the land. Verses 10 to 15, the righteous will inherit the land and the wicked's plotting will be destroyed. And then verse 16, the righteous are blessed. 17, Yahweh upholds the righteous. First part of verse 18, Yahweh guides the righteous. The second part of verse 18, the righteous inherit. Verse 19, the righteous get. And then verse 20, the wicked perish. And so at this point, the psalm then begins to mirror itself. So in verse 21, the righteous give. In verse 22, the blessed inherit. Verse 23, Yahweh guides the righteous. Verse 24, Yahweh upholds. Verses 25 to 26, the righteous are not forsaken. Verse 27 to 33, the righteous will inherit the land and the wicked's plotting will be destroyed. Verse 34, wait and inherit the land. And then finally, verses 5 to 40, God destroys the wicked but saves the righteous. The psalm opens with an encouragement not to get too concerned with the wicked. They may be successful now, but it won't last long. Instead, trust in the Lord that he will be your provision. He will cause you to dwell in his land, give you the desires of your heart, act on your behalf, and lead you in the righteousness. All it requires is that you patiently wait on him, and he will cause you to prosper in a way that the wicked never could. So refrain from getting angry, because the wicked will be cut off for their evil. They will be no more, and the righteous will inherit the land. This message is repeated throughout the psalm and can be seen as the main focus of the psalm. Each pairing of verses reinforces this message. Do not become jealous of the wicked who seem to prosper. They won't. Ultimately, they will fail and fall away. Instead, live a blameless life and you will be sustained and blessed by God. Thanks for joining us today. Take a moment to reflect on what you've read and share your thoughts or questions below. If you're watching in the future, then you can click here for the next session, or you can find the full playlist just down here. To receive these daily commentaries in your email inbox, subscribe via the link in the description below. Have a great day and I'll see you tomorrow.